we're going to start recording now, which I'll cut away. Don't worry. I'll cut it once we actually start. I'll cut this all off.
So I don't have to censor yet.
No.
I can speak my mind.
Yeah, we can talk about how horrible, liberal Jews are.
Right, of course.
Peter Beinhart.
And cut.
And cut.
And cut.
Hey. What's up?
Are we broadcasting?
No, we're not broadcasting.
Baruch Hashem. Hello. Wait, can I ask you guys a question?
Sure.
Only if it's a good one.
All right. Zach.
Yes.
Can you, all right. Do I look like I'm reading off a screen?
No.
All right, perfect. All right, I'm going to just read this then, and that's how that's going to work. So I'm supposed to still text you when I'm ready, right, Douglas?
Correct. Yeah. So what will happen in this order is that I will start broadcasting, and that means that attendees can join the session.
Okay.
At that point, you'll monitor the number of attendees, and when you think we have a quorum, you'll send me a message letting me know that you want to start.
Perfect. Love that. And that will be my text to you. I'm actually going to get that together now. I'll WhatsApp you.
Okay.
All right. And I'll have it ready to send. And I'm also going to go offline for the first part because I'm like in the middle of cooking dinner and it's all going to burn after I give my intro.
No worries.
Just so you guys know what's up in my household.
All right.
What are you cooking for dinner?
We're making cauliflower pizza.
Nice. That sounds delicious.
Cauliflower crust with some vegetarian meat and mushrooms all mixed together.
Okay.
And then I'm going to put sauce down and then the meat and then cheese on top of it.
That sounds amazing.
Sounds really good.
I love cauliflower. A lot of people don't like it, but I love the taste.
It can be a little mealy.
Cauliflower.
I'm sorry? What'd you say, Zach?
It can be a little mealy.
Yeah, especially I'm so glad that it's not broccoli because broccoli's super mealy.
Really?
It just turns into mush. Yeah, like especially if you overcook broccoli.
Well, yes.
Yeah, it won't have any the texture will go from crunchy to gelatin.
Well, the best way to make broccoli is to saute it in olive oil and garlic.
Yoni just texted me that he's jumping in the shower. Do you think he's kidding?
No minute like the last.
I guess we're gonna have a little moment of. Can people hear me?
Oh my God! I know.
Hey, it's his event.
Can people hear me?
That's true. That's a good point, Zachary.
His face is plastered all over it.
Yeah.
So
sorry, go on.
I was saying they sued United Airlines for not giving people refunds for their tickets.
Oh, Douglas, I meant to ask you. You might know this. Is it unreasonable to purchase stock in the airlines right now with the hope that after this is all over, they'll shoot up?
Not unreasonable. Sorry, I'm answering for Douglas. Hopefully he has the same answer. But you need to invest in the right airlines, correct, Stephen?
Like Alaska Airlines.
Alaska.
Yeah.
Don't do Alaska.
Okay.
Don't do American. No,
But
Americans.
Alaska's doing well right now.
No, they're cutting 80% of their flights.
Oh, just
And
kidding.
they have a small market capital.
Yoni's a part-time or a partial owner of JetBlue.
Yeah, he taught me all about his 11 shares that he bought.
11 shares.
Yeah.
Well, tell him, he should get on the board of directors,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I I was browsing the market the other day, and JetBlue stock is like under $10 right now.
Yeah, I mean,
Fair.
Delta's a great investment.
Hasn't
The air-
Delta gone bankrupt before?
all the airlines have gone bankrupt before.
Oh,
They run on very thin margins.
well, I mean, I don't know. I feel like buying stock right now in airlines is basically just a gamble on whether or not you think they're going to go bankrupt or whether they're going to recover.
Yeah.
I don't
I
know.
don't think the government would let them get big.
Yeah, Steven says he doesn't think the government would let them go bankrupt. But like I
Well-
read like in the UK, like Virgin, for instance, was trying to like get funding from look who decided to show up. Get funding from the like government or whatever.
Right. Well, no, and I know that the airlines in this country are lobbying the government super hard for that right now. I mean, I remember back during the auto industry crash, like GM was bailed out by the government, but not until after they went bankrupt and the investors lost everything. So I wouldn't want that to happen with the airlines if I invest in them now.
I mean, are you looking to invest a lot?
No, of course not.
Zach, stop bitching.
I'm
do you-
discussing. We're having
Don't buy, Zach, don't buy American Airlines.
You
Mark
buy
my
12
words.
shares of JetBlue.
Huh?
I said, Zach, you should buy 12 shares of
just to
JetBlue.
one up Yoni.
One up Yoni.
We'll
Guys,
see.
you want to see something funny? I'm wearing a shirt, but pajama pants.
Oh yeah, I'm wearing a button down and like basketball shorts right now.
Yeah, I'm wearing a t-shirt and leggings.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great.
Because
This
we're
is
not
good.
broadcasting 100%.
No, we're not broadcasting.
Oh
100%.
shoot.
I got the professional in the front and the non-professional in the back.
Oh,
Great, great look.
it's the first speaking event I get to do while I drink Turkish coffee.
How can you drink Turkish coffee at 7 at night? That doesn't keep you up.
I'll make it very clear for you because I have big balls.
Right.
God forbid this was.
No, I'll probably stay up until like 3 a.m. too.
I drank 2 Red Bulls last night at like midnight, and then I went to
Why?
bed. I like the taste, you know.
Yeah, dude, I love Red Bull.
I've
It's
never
like
had a Red Bull in my life.
It's delicious. Have you
It's
had
like-
have you had one of those XL energy drinks in Israel?
No.
you mean Avon? What do they call that? Amway, XL?
Yeah. Because those are the same thing.
No,
XL, yeah, dude, it tastes the exact same
huh?
to me. I also
Well-
drank those religiously when I was on Birthright.
Wait, Dougie,
Yeah, I'm taking your video off, Zach.
Okay.
Douglas, I have my script on the computer. I can read it as I'm talking, right?
Yeah, as long as well, at this point, it's kind of late to practice anything, but you just read it, you know, and just do your best to have it at enough of a distance so it doesn't look like you're scanning using your eyes.
Yeah, I have a split screen right now between the webinar and my remarks.
Pop.
Oh. What just happened?
I don't know.
Nothing. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, Yoni, if you move your screen back a little bit, Steven, it's okay. If you move your screen back a little bit, it won't look like you're reading. That's what I'm gonna do.
Correct. Yeah.
So is this good?
Pretend
Yeah.
like
Looks
say
good.
something.
The Palestinians could have had a state in 1937 if they would not be as stubborn as.
Yeah. You're fine.
Okay.
Cool. So what time are we gonna start broadcasting?
Whenever you tell me. You want to start? We can start in 2 minutes if you like, and then that'll give people time to join, and
Sure.
Then
And so
you can.
will when I turn will I be muted or should I mute my like when I ask you to turn on video, should I also will I also be unmuted or do I need to unmute myself?
I will send you. I can unmute you, but I think it's still going to ask you permission to enable your microphone. So
Okay,
just be
great.
prepared. Just be prepared for it to ask you to enable video and your audio.
Perfect. And then before we go on, I'm just going to see how many people have signed up.
Okay, I'm going to. I can start by muting Zach if that's okay.
Yeah, that's always a good idea.
You, Yoni.
All right, we have 33 signed up.
Okay, and so Zach is. When is Zach coming in? Yoni will speak, and then Zach will come in once he starts answering questions. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna give like, a spiel. Thank you, Yoni. Blah blah blah. Here's how it's gonna work.
After Yoni gives his talk.
Yes.
Okay, sounds great. Hallie, when do you want me to start the Facebook stream? When Yoni begins speaking?
No, we can start maybe at like I think we should start as soon as we start letting people in.
Okay.
Like right after. Yeah, cuz they'll just see this thing anyways.
Sounds good.
I like 703.
It's a good time.
Okay.
Maybe 703. I'll let you know. I'll let you know what's up.
Okay, so then I will mute everybody and then I'll start broadcasting now to see how many people we start getting in.
Okay, perfect. And we'll take Yoni's video off.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pop me in like last minute, like.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our second Camera on Campus online conversation. My name is Hayley Hebert, and I'm the Director of Campus Programming and Strategic Relationships. We are so excited to have all of you here participating in our conversation titled No Partisanship, Just Accuracy, How to Answer Difficult Questions About Israel. In a moment, I'll be introducing our speaker, but before I do that, I would like to tell you a little bit about Camera on Campus. Camera is a nonpartisan media research organization. We aim to correct inaccurate information presented in the media. In the campus department, we focus on correcting information in the campus papers, classrooms, and guest speakers. We provide assistance to students through our two programs, the Camera on Campus Coalition and the Camera Fellowship. Our Camera Fellows are writing articles in their campus paper, responding to biased and inaccurate articles, and hosting educational events and writing workshops. We train our students to expose and correct misinformation spread about Israel and proactively educate about Israel and the conflict. They do this through our annual Summer International Training Conference and through guidance from our staff and researchers throughout the year. We are currently accepting applications for our Camera Fellowship, and we'll send a link out in the follow-up email, as well as a registration link for our May 4th event, where we will be diving a little bit more into what those programs consist of. This will be one of many online conversations that we host, and tonight we're hoping that this conversation can be interactive and engaging. So while our speaker will be asking you some questions, it's important to know our Zoom house rules to ensure that this conversation is engaging for everyone. So that being said, our awesome tech staff, Douglas, will be giving you access to turn on your video. He has to do this one by one, so you might experience a momentary pause. If you feel comfortable, we would love for everyone to turn on their cameras so that we can feel like we're all together in the same room. Please mute yourself, but there will be an opportunity to unmute yourself when the speaker calls on you. Please make yourself aware of the Zoom functions at the bottom of your screen. Tonight, we'll be using the raise hand, the Q&A, and the chat functions. The raise hand button is listed at the bottom of the participants list. Lastly, we released a form a few days ago to collect your questions for tonight. If you haven't submitted your questions yet, then feel free to write your questions at any point in the Q&A function below. So to get things started, please introduce yourself in the chat box with your first name and the city from where you're joining us from. While you do that, it is my pleasure to introduce Yoni Michanie, Camera's campus advisor and strategic planner. He's a writer, speaker, activist, former IDF paratrooper, and has written for the Jerusalem Post, the Daily Wire, the Forward, the Allgemeiner, and the Times of Israel. He holds an MA in Diplomacy and Conflict Resolution from IDC Herzliya and addresses the Israeli-Palestinian conflict through the lenses of academia on his personal experiences. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to Yoni, and then please enjoy this evening's conversation.
So much for joining us this evening, and I hope all of you are staying healthy and positive, because at the end of the day, this too shall pass. More importantly, because for those of you who don't speak fluent Hebrew, Fauda 3 will be premiering next week, so that's very exciting. As Hayley said, I'm Camera's campus advisor and strategic planner, and for the past 2 years, I've traveled all over the United States to speak on college campuses on topics such as anti-Semitism in the US, Israel's place in the international community, and of course, the Arab-Israeli politics. Anti-Zionism tends to very frequently traffic in images, tropes, and libels that have a very long history in anti-Semitic tradition, which tend to stretch back thousands of years. For example, when you hear that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, which is of course manifestly not, you're abusing the word and trafficking in a classic anti-Semitic trope, suggesting that the Jewish people have a particular kind of bloodlust. Or if you say that Israel or Israeli leaders have hypnotized the world to get them to do their bidding, that again goes back to an old anti-Semitic trope. For example, consider Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's tweet in 2012. Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken them and help them to see the evil doings of Israel. Now, let's replace the word Israel or the Jewish state with the term Jews. The trope that Jews blindly lead the world into chaos and disaster is really not a new one. In fact, Barry Weiss, writer and editor in the New York Times opinion section, has successfully traced it back to the time of Jesus' crucifixion in Roman-occupied Jerusalem. And she explains, the New Testament is a small band of Jews who get Rome, then the greatest power in the world, to do their bidding by killing Christ. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor at the time, speaks to the Jews about Jesus in the book of John. And he says, take him yourselves and judge him according to your own law. But the Jews punt the decision back to Pilate and explain, we're not permitted to put anyone on death. We're not permitted to put anyone to death. And so Pilate does the deed on their behalf. And in the book of Matthew, the implication that this manipulation is basically spelled out, where it says, his blood is on us and our children, which the Jews basically say. A line that has been so historically destructive that even Mel Gibson cut it from his very famous movie, The Passion of the Christ. The trope that Jews, or in this very convenient case, the Jewish state, are the cause for another people's suffering is not a new one. In fact, during many of the anti-Israel protests I personally witnessed and attended, you could find yourself very easily removing the Palestinian flags and replacing the terms Zionist, as were being chanted, with the term Jew. And you could easily be reminded of the pogroms in Russia, perhaps even be reminded of Nazi Germany. The issue for those who wanted to hate Jews in a post-Holocaust world was that it needed to be disguised, because it couldn't be as overt as Nazi propaganda was in the mid-1930s, or as forward as Lenin's anti-Semitic propaganda during the Communist Revolution of 1917. And in all three of these major issues that I've presented on college campuses, I've noticed an unfortunate and growing pattern. Distinguishing legitimate criticism of Israel from anti-Semitism is becoming increasingly difficult. For the purposes of this discussion, I'd like to make one thing very, very clear. Not all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic, because if that were the case, the largest number of anti-Semites would actually be located in Tel Aviv. Anti-Zionism increasingly difficult to recognize. It has been able to replace its hatred of the Jewish people with hatred of the Jewish state. But to anyone who has any form of interaction with the history of anti-Semitism, this really should not come as a surprise. Because as Russia's communist revolution took hold of Eastern Europe, Jews were labeled as greedy capitalists. And as Hitler's Nationalist Socialist Party, basically fascism, took hold of Germany, Jews were labeled as Bolsheviks. And in the 1970s, when national liberation movements in both Africa and Asia spread like wildfire, only the Jewish national liberation movement was labeled as racist. As white supremacy is now on the rise, Jews are, without a surprise, being labeled as white. So in a post-colonial world, where the terms imperialism, colonialism, and illegal occupation have been finally recognized as modern evils by social justice movements and trends, there must be a way to associate these terms to the modern Jew. Unfortunately, there's yet to be a generally accepted consensus on anti-Zionism being the world's most normalized form of anti-Semitism. And while these debates continue, anti-Semitism continues to infiltrate mainstream discourse, politics, academia, and the media. And in doing so, it becomes increasingly difficult to detect. This is particularly attributed to two different factors. The first one, accusations against the state of Israel are becoming much more nuanced. We don't just have to worry with the terminology that's being used, but we have to concern ourselves with the application as well. And the second one, the one that I think is more relevant to our discussion today, is oftentimes, due to a lack of sufficient information, advocates for Israel will rush to categorize legitimate criticism of Israel as anti-Semitism. And in doing so, meaningful discourse is often shut down. And there can't be any common ground reached. This pushes the people engaged in the respective conversation back to their extremes, and they become unwilling to hear anything that might challenge their preconceived notions. Look, Israel is not a perfect state, nor does it claim to be. Just like the United States, one might find racism in abundance. And just like in the United States, Israel can do a lot more for its LGBTQ community. And just like in the United States, Israel can work a lot harder to improve income inequality gaps amongst both men and women. Loving the state of Israel or wanting to advocate for it does not mean that we shut down legitimate criticism of her. Personally, I believe that we can't love someone or something by dismissing their faults. We can only truly love it in spite of their faults. And I think the same applies to accepting and recognizing Israel's faults. See, when I first met Alan Dershowitz, I asked him what his advice was regarding Israel advocacy. And he responded, don't ever enter a conversation without understanding that Israel is not a perfect country. Ariel Sharon had a very popular saying about Israel. If you want to criticize Israel, fight for her first. But looking back at that quote, I don't want to believe that it implies that everyone should put on a uniform and charge into a battlefield. I want to believe that this quote actually refers to the concept of intent. Meaning, when you criticize Israel, what are your intentions? Are your intentions to harm her people, to debilitate her security apparatus, isolate her from the community of self-determining peoples? Or are your intentions to stimulate its socioeconomic development, to assure her people a future with the promise of dignity and freedom, to contribute its prosperity, and play a role in securing her survival? Intentions are everything. And Natan Sharansky, a former Soviet political prisoner, human rights activist, and former chairman of the Jewish Agency, understood the need to distinguish anti-Semitism and legitimate criticism of Israel. And he did so with leaving us a very simple formula. It's called the 3 Ds. Has anyone heard of it? Let's see how I can check on the chat. Has anyone here heard of Natan Sharansky's 3 Ds test? Okay, Dexter Van Zyl says yes, yes, yes. Okay, Dexter, you want to tell us what that is?
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry that my bald head, I am going to rent out my space on my bald head for sponsors on Zoom conferences. But essentially the 3 Ds are the delegitimization of Israel, the demonization of Israel, and the application of double standards against Israel.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Dexter. So yes, exactly like was just mentioned. So let's look at the first D. When the Jewish state is being demonized, when Israel's actions are being blown out of all sensible proportion, when comparisons are made between Israelis and Nazis, or between Palestinian refugee camps and Auschwitz, this is blatant anti-Semitism. It is not a legitimate criticism of the state of Israel. The second D is the test of the double standards. This is the same double standard which dominated the United Nations Human Rights Council from 2006 to 2015. Because during this time period, and let's do a test of integrity, I'm going to ask that no one open another tab to check on Google, but can anyone tell me between 2006 to 2015, how many condemnations Iran, the world's leading exporter of terrorism, received? Okay, Kate Eppers says 0. There were 5, but close. Next, Venezuela, perhaps the most repressive regime in the Western Hemisphere. How many condemnations did they receive? Feel free to go ahead and type the answer if you know it. Eventually, if you keep saying 0, someone might get the answer correct. Sigal, That's correct. 0. Libya, spearheading the world's most complex and successful slave trade, received only 2 condemnations. In Syria, a country which has used chemical weapons against their own people, which has created 15 million refugees in the last decade, and has killed over 500,000 of its own people, how many condemnations did they receive from 2006 to 2015? Anyone? Five. Okay. Well, they actually received 17, which you would think is appropriate until you look at the amount of condemnations that Israel received. The Middle East's only liberal democracy, a world leader in technological innovation, and model for human rights in a tormented region, received how many condemnations between 2006 to 2015? Anyone knows the answer? Too many. Okay. Over 17. Any one last guess? You know what we need to do for the next Zoom session is be able to play the Jeopardy music while we do these kind of Quizlets.
Just gonna chime in here, guys. Sorry, I know you can't see me right now, but I'm Douglas. I'm a campus advisor, and we want the session to be as interactive as possible. So if you guys want to unmute your mics to give a response to Yoni, feel free to. Doesn't only have to be in the chat. We want this to be fun, interactive, and of course we want to hear your voices as well. So
okay. So Abby Shilkret, I think, is closest to the answer. It may be because her son actually works for camera, which is an unfair advantage, but Israel actually received 62 condemnations. 62 condemnations. That's more than all the other prior countries combined. The third D is the test of delegitimization. When Israel's fundamental right to exist is denied, and its entry into the community of self-aspiring, in self-determining people is denied, alone amongst all other people in the world, this too is anti-Semitism. And this is the basic formula that Natan Sharansky is leaving us with at very turbulent times, at times where it is becoming increasingly difficult with all the noise, with all the echo chambers to distinguish what is legitimate criticism of Israel, what is anti-Semitism. And having said all of this, I would love to dive into this evening's Q&A session, which I am personally very much looking forward to. And again, please feel free to send your questions our way. I know we had a few questions that were submitted to us before the webinar started. And I think we need to bring in Zach Schildkraut to moderate.
All right, well, thank you so much, Yoni. That was fantastic as always. I think you have given us some very inspirational ideas to think about. You had some very positive ideas in there. It's definitely given us a lot to think about going forward. Hello, everyone. It seems that my video is not on yet. It is not working, unfortunately, but I promise I'm here. Oh, wait, there it is. Oh, there it is. Hi, everyone. I'm Zach Schildkraut. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Camera's campus advisor and online editor. I think I speak for my whole team here when I say that we're really glad that you guys could join us for this discussion today. As you can see, Yoni's a pretty smart guy, so you definitely picked a good one to attend. So without further ado, I'll stop blabbering and I'll give you guys a chance to ask Yoni any questions that you might have. We had 5 questions that were submitted to us ahead of time. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna read those first. But if any of you think of anything that you would like Yoni to answer, please feel free to write them in the chat function, not the Q&A function. I believe that our Q&A function is not working right now. So please put all of your questions into the chat function, which is at the bottom of your screen. Keep in mind that this discussion is about coming up with ways to answer tough questions about Israel. So by all means, please don't hold back, but at the same time, please make sure to keep everything respectful. So without further ado, we will jump into the questions that were submitted to us ahead of time. So Yoni, our first question is, should Israel show extra restraint militarily in Gaza because the IDF is a significantly more powerful army than Hamas is? So for that reason, should they keep that in mind and hold back or show restraint when there's fighting going on?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one that I've encountered a lot on college campuses. And again, it's part of this growing trend towards social justice, where students who very much want to be involved in human rights causes often look at the numbers that the media publishes, and all of a sudden they're confronted with a chart with two sets of numbers. One being the casualties that Palestinians are experiencing in the Gaza Strip, for example, during a military confrontation, and then compare that to Israeli numbers. And then they say, well, there's of course disproportionate warfare going on because you have hundreds of Palestinians dying in comparison to a dozen or so Israelis. And so something doesn't look right. So that's a fantastic question, and one which the students that we work with at Camera encounter quite a lot. I think the more important thing to start off with is the concept of international law. International law does not say that a country who is more powerful in military terms than another sovereign country or another terrorist organization combatant, what it would be, that particular country is not allowed to use its full force. That's the whole concept of military deterrence. That's why military deterrence is allowed under international law, because countries seek to maximize their military capabilities in order to deter potential aggressors from beginning hostilities or any form of military confrontation. So that's number one. There's nothing in international law that protects that. The second one is the concept of proportionality. And then again, I'll defer to Alan Dershowitz's judgment, who quite eloquently explained that proportionality doesn't refer to the final tolls like we would see in media publications. The term proportionality actually refers to the intent to kill. And so what we have to look at is what would happen if the IDF did not have the Iron Dome. For those of you who don't know, the Iron Dome is a piece of technology which allows Israel to detect incoming rockets, estimate their trajectory, calculate whether they're going to fall into civilian populated areas, and if they are, bring the rockets down before they can cause any civilian damage. So if Israel didn't have that, and at the same time, Hamas was firing hundreds of rockets indiscriminately at civilian areas, what would be the total number of casualties that Israel would have to endure? Ultimately, that's what we have to look at. And so, no, the question becomes, Israel should absolutely not be forced to have its hands tied behind its back and endure terrorist blows, basically, to its own civilian population. And we can again defer to Natan Sharansky's second D, the double standard. No such request would be made from any other sovereign country around the world to do that, and neither should that be requested from Israel.
Great, thank you, Yoni. Yeah, I think all of that makes perfect sense. The next question that we have on our queue here is, can you understand how some Palestinians might resort to violence or terrorism out of fear or despair or worrying that any kind of peace process is being stalled?
If I would have skipped all my history lessons, and if I were to look at the conflict as it stands now, yes, I would understand. The problem is that we have a list of facts that indicate otherwise. So I'd like to explain very briefly what happened with the Oslo Accords, what it was, and how terrorism came to play a very significant role and essentially shaped the attitudes of modern day Israelis towards peace with the current Palestinian leadership. So in 1993, Bill Clinton invited Yasser Arafat and back then Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin for basically an amazing moment in history where both sides would agree to recognize each other and to start working towards a final path to establishing a conclusive peace agreement between both parties. Now, the world stood at awe as Bill Clinton stands in the middle between Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin and brings them closer together as they shake hands. It was a beautiful picture. But the fact is that it didn't mean anything, because in the 15 years leading up to the Oslo Accords, we had less attacks against Israelis than the 5 years after the Oslo Accords. There's empirical evidence to support that. Now, what does that mean? That when Israel made concessions towards peace, in a span of 5 years, they endured more terrorist attacks against their own civilian population than they did 15 years before the talks began or were concluded. What message does this send to Israelis for peace? More importantly, in addressing your question, if there was a significant prospect of peace on the table, why did the Palestinian leadership then result to more terrorism than it did before the prospects of peace were actually ever something realistic? So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it does. It's a bleak situation, but at the same time, I think looking at the actual facts on the ground is very enlightening. So thank you, Yoni. The next one we have in our queue is kind of a multi-part question, sort of two questions in one, and they are settlements the obstacle to peace? Settlements meaning Jewish communities in the West Bank, colloquially referred to as the settlements, just so we're all on the same page here. So are settlements the obstacle to peace, and are settlements an obstacle to peace?
Right. Two very important questions. The first one is a simple no. Settlements are not the obstacle to peace because, again, we're able to look at history and understand what happened before the establishment of settlements. So settlements only began after Israel won in a defensive maneuver, the Six-Day War, and took control of the West Bank. Only then settlements began. But in fact, if you look at the numbers published by the Israeli government, you'll see that the amount of Jews that died at the hands of Palestinian terrorism pre-1967, actually from 1917, from the signing of the Balfour Declaration, all the way to 1967, the eve before the Six-Day War, when there were no settlements, grabbed that number of Jews that were murdered by Palestinian or Arab violence, and compare it to the number of Jews that died from 1967 after the Six-Day War, when settlements began, to 2015. And you'll find that there's very little difference between the two numbers. So what we understand is there was terrorism before settlements existed. Therefore, settlements cannot be the obstacle to peace, which that leads me into your fourth question. Are settlements an obstacle to peace? Again, I personally don't believe settlements are an obstacle to peace. And this is one of those topics of discussion that the majority of Israelis engage in. And this is where we cross from, anti-Semitism into legitimately criticizing the Israeli government, depending on where one might stand on the construction of settlements. However, I again like to look at history. And the fact is that both right-wing and left-wing governments in Israel have conceded territory and have uprooted settlements time after time in order to attain peace. We did it successfully in the 1980s. In Sinai, my dad was actually ordered during his basic training to uproot one of the settlements in Sinai, Yamit. And that eventually led to a successful peace process that has held up since 1979. And the other one, unfortunately, hasn't. I'm referring to the disengagement from the Gaza Strip in 2005. Unfortunately, that has not yielded a long-standing peace agreement, but Israel did uproot thousands of Israelis, not just them physically. It uprooted businesses, it uprooted entire lives. It even went as far as to uprooting Jewish graves in order to not leave a single Jew behind. We have uprooted thousands and thousands and thousands of our own civilians. I say own because I'm Israeli, but we've uprooted thousands and thousands of our own civilians time and time again in history for the name of peace. That's the first reason. And Israel would, having successfully done it in the past, it shouldn't be an obstacle again if that's what the Israeli government chooses to determine. The second one is, again, looking at history. In the discussions of peace in 2001 between Yasser Arafat and back then Prime Minister Ehud Barak, and then again in 2008 with the Olmert peace plan was proposed to the Palestinian chairman Mahmoud Abbas. In both of those peace proposals, the Palestinian leadership had allowed Israel to retain 5 major settlement blocks. The 5 major settlement blocks that Israel has now, which are very controversial, the Palestinian leadership has already, in 2 separate discussions of peace and 2 different peace plans, had already accepted to concede to Israel. So no, I personally don't believe that settlements are an obstacle to peace, but it's a conversation that is always worth having with people from all along all sides of the political aisle.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all of that is pretty spot on. And everyone keep in mind that as an organization, Camera, we don't take any political positions in terms of Israeli policy. We don't endorse settlements. We don't condemn settlements. You are all entitled to explore these questions on your own because they're very complicated and they're worth having. And you are free to come up with your own conclusions and advocate for your own policies that you think would result in the most just situations. Everything that we're saying is purely from an analytical perspective, a historical analytical perspective. This is not to endorse or condemn anything. But thank you for that, Yoni. I think that was a really good answer. Last but not least, for our questions that were submitted ahead of time, and then we'll dive into questions that are being submitted on the chat here. So thank you everyone for that. So the last question submitted beforehand is, isn't it racist for major political parties in Israel, specifically Likud, Blue and White, the 2 biggest parties in Israel, isn't it racist for them to not want to bring Arab politicians into a coalition? I know a lot of people have been talking about that, and there's a lot of that in the media.
Again, we have to look at intent. I believe that every comment that has been made by Israeli party officials, both in the Blue and White party and in the Likud party, was that the reasons why they primarily objected working or even collaborating with the Arab Joint List parties is because of their record and continued insistence on basically weakening or debilitating Israel's security apparatus. Again, like you said, that's not a stance that Camera takes or would take. Those are the points that were made by party officials. race, religion, ethnicity was never a subject that was brought up by either party as to an objection as to why they wouldn't collaborate with the Arab Joint List. And again, empirical evidence to support the claims that both party officials are saying are quite abundant. In fact, there's quite a rap sheet that the Arab Joint List Party has accumulated over the years, from climbing aboard flotillas that sought to disturb the IDF's military blockade in Gaza, to filtering intelligence information to Hezbollah, to calling for the eradication of Israel as a Jewish state. These are certainly just a few items in that long rap sheet that I mentioned. Second of all, I'd like to point out something interesting. I bet that the person, more often than not, that will accuse current government officials in Israel for being racist, for not wanting to collaborate with the Arab Joint List Party, were the same ones that remained quiet when Prime Minister Netanyahu was about to allow Otzma Yehudit to come in and join the coalition. Otzma Yehudi is a violent, recognized extremist party in the Israeli Knesset. And again, that is an application of a double standard, choosing to address one decision of mainstream party lines, not wanting to work with one extreme, but refusing to cover the rejection that most of these party officials had to working with Otzma Yehudit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. It highlights a blatant double standard at play here. For anyone who's interested in learning more about that, one of our analysts, Gilad Eni, wrote a fantastic piece that highlights the double standard that Yoni just mentioned. When this event is over, if any of you are interested in reading more, please feel free to reach out to me, Yoni, Douglas, Sasha, Hallie, any of us on the Camera on Campus team, and we can get you more materials to learn more about this fascinating stuff. Our editor at UK Media Watch, which is an affiliate of Camera, Adam Levick, has also done a lot of writing recently about the Joint List Party and their relations with Likud, Blue and White, what have you. So you can go to ukmediawatch.org and check that out too. Okay, great, awesome. So those are all of our questions that were submitted ahead of time. So I will jump into questions that people have submitted in the chat. So it looks like we have a few here. I'll start with the first one I see on the screen, which is, so when someone legitimately brings up something worthy of criticism, along with one or more of the 3Ds that you mentioned during your introductory talk, how do you address the legitimate part while also pointing out the illegitimacy of the other parts, assuming they're there?
Okay. I think we can address that with an example. I think the best example I can use to this is the Palestinian leadership's attitude towards Israel building settlements in the West Bank. So someone may bring up Israel's settlement policy, and they'll refuse to acknowledge the Palestinian leadership's stance on Israel's building in the West Bank. What do I mean by that? The Palestinian leadership is 100% objected to any Jew living in a future Palestinian state. Okay, that means that by default, the Palestinian leadership is making the establishment of a Palestinian state dependent on it being ethnically cleansed from Jews. Meanwhile, Israel's population is composed of 21% by Arabs, which enjoy equal rights in Israel and have been completely integrated by the most part into Israeli society. I think the point is that when someone is talking about the right of Jews to live in these parts in the West Bank, you first have to ask them, what is your objection to a Jew wanting to live there? And then, you know, you take it from there. Is their answer based on geopolitics, or is their answer based on also believing that Jews have no inherent right to live on that land? And if the answer is the latter, then you can explain that that person right now is engaging in anti-Semitism. I hope that that answers it. But mostly it's about picking and choosing your battles. If you believe that the person you're engaging with is constantly endorsing anti-Semitic stances, or is not really interested in having dialogue in where you could introduce facts and points of evidence and present your case, then, you know, that may not be a conversation worth having. Now, I'll say something else that's very relevant, I think, to that question. Just because an anti-Semitic trope is invoked, even if it's in the form of anti-Zionism, it doesn't mean that that person in and of itself is an anti-Semite. And I think that is important to recognize. And I think that a lot of people, the majority of people that I've engaged with in this subject, would like the opportunity to be corrected and told that the comment they made was, you know, inherently practicing anti-Semitism. So I think a lot of people may be open to being kindly shown the inconsistencies of their argument.
Definitely. Thank you, Yoni. For anyone who maybe thinks of questions later or wants Yoni to expand upon his answers, feel free to reach out to him. He's most available between the hours of midnight and 4 in the morning. So just keep that in mind when you want to learn more information. So you're welcome, Yoni.
Yes,
anyway,
absolutely.
let's go to our next question on the list here, which is, how do you engage with people who are Jewish who unjustly condemn Israel, most likely in accordance with the Natan Sharansky's 3D policy that you talked about earlier? I think this is definitely a very relevant question, considering there are a lot of organizations, especially very active on college campuses, such as Jewish Voice for Peace, or if not now, which many people justifiably say implement double standards against Israel or treat Israel unfairly, but they describe themselves as Jewish organizations. So a lot of people say, well, you can't implement these same, you can't apply these same standards to them because they're Jewish, so they can't be anti-Semitic. So how would you address that whole issue?
So before I dive into that, let me just say one quick thing about Jewish Voice for Peace. I personally believe that there's nothing Jewish about Jewish Voice for Peace. They don't really have much of a voice, and they definitely don't stand for peace. That I think is very relevant. Now, for someone who's worked on college campuses for the past 2 years, I can tell you that our main concern isn't really in Jewish Voice for Peace. They are absolutely an extremist group, to where they've applauded and rewarded convicted Palestinian terrorists, most notably Rasmi Odeh. Our concern more lies with organizations like If Not Now and J Street. And I'll say two things about those two organizations. I don't believe that Jews who subscribe to their ideology are 100% aware as to what they are subscribing to. For example, when you go into J Street's website, you'll find all the beautiful vernacular out there: pro-peace, pro-Israel, pro-American, pro-beautiful, pro-human rights, and blah, blah, blah. And it sounds very appealing. And, you know, it was strategically prepared that way. But in fact, you know, at times, J Street has given credibility and legitimacy to the BDS movement. More importantly, if you are, you know, using this time to follow social media and discussions about Israel on social media, and if you had the chance to look at If Not Now's Twitter feed, you'll notice that they've spent the last 2 weeks basically proposing that Israel is the main perpetrator for current Palestinian suffering in the West Bank. But that's ridiculous. That's absolutely absurd. Now, if you're interested in this, and I can definitely send more sources your way, but the Jerusalem Post a couple days ago came out with a fascinating article, and I'm astounded that it hasn't gained more traction. But in the article, the Jerusalem Post exposed how the Palestinian Authority has chosen to pay terrorists and their families before they pay social welfare teachers, before they pay public health officials, before they pay teachers. It is unbelievable. If you look at how the Palestinian leadership has prioritized the pay for slave policy over the funding and development of its own social welfare infrastructure, it is absolutely astounding. In 2019, it's estimated that the Palestinian Authority received almost $14 million in foreign aid. Okay. Now, with $14 million, let me tell you exactly what that could have done for the Palestinian people. It could have bought 387,143 coronavirus test kits, or it could have bought 465 low-cost MIT ventilators. Okay. Now, not only that, anyone who's been following the current economic situation in Israel, they'll know that Israel's economy right now is in shambles. It's been completely turned over by 3 unexpected elections in a span of 1 year, which have costed the Israeli economy tens of millions of dollars. 25% of Israel is out of work. 25%, that's historic. That has never happened. Yet Israel continues to invest resources into cooperating or trying to cooperate with the Palestinian leadership by sending them medical equipment, by sending them food, by sending them essentials. The same essentials that the Palestinian leadership could have provided for their own people had they not been investing money into encouraging their own people to go out and murder Jews. So how do we have these discussions with Jews? We first ask them, what is your concern? Are you concerned about Palestinian well-being? Do you want to be a social justice advocate? Because I do too. I care about human rights. I hope that the Palestinians are healthy, and I hope that the Palestinians get through this just the same way I hope every nation in the world gets through this. But if you care, if you truly cared about Palestinian rights, if you truly cared about Palestinian well-being, you would make a list of all the challenges that the Palestinian people are facing. And I guarantee you, Israel is probably at the bottom or on the lower half of that list. First, you should start by addressing the pay for slave policy. First, you should start by addressing why every Palestinian child is subjected to learning that the Holocaust was exaggerated for Zionists to fulfill their political goals. So these are the discussions that we should be having with our Jewish peers. We should first find what they care about, and I guarantee you most of the people that I've spoken to, and if not now, Ann and Jay Sreed, care about Palestinian well-being. And it's admirable. That inherent desire to care is admirable. But then we should transfer that concern and allocate it to the right causes that need to be challenged in order for the status quo to change.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think those are all very good points, Yoni. If you guys in the audience would like to learn more about what is, in my opinion, appropriately referred to as the Palestinian leadership's pay for slave policy, definitely visit camera.org, shameless plug, I'm sorry, but we have a lot of really, really good work exposing that practice from the Palestinian leaders. I happen to know that the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, a cool think tank in Israel, has also done a lot of work to expose that practice from the Palestinian leadership. Again, Camera is an apolitical organization that is not to endorse any policy suggestions that that think tank puts out there, but in terms of this one specific issue, they have done a lot of good work on that. I remember reading, Yoni, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the people who planned the, was it Sbarro pizzeria bombing within Israel in 2002 have received over 900,000 US dollars.
Yes, approximately $1 million have been distributed between the individual that orchestrated the bombing, between the bomb maker, and the family members of the suicide bomber that carried out the attack, which left over 17 Israelis dead.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. There really aren't any words that can accurately capture how awful that is. So thank you for bringing that up, Yoni. I think it's a really important point to make. Let's move on to a next question here, which I think is very interesting. The question reads, and just to let everyone know, we're going to be wrapping up in a few minutes here. This may be our last one. If any of you guys want to throw in a question into the chat last minute, please feel free to do so. Anyway, this question is, how do you respond to questions that attempt to delegitimize Israel's democracy, specifically due to the current state of the Israeli government, that is political hardships, inability to form a government, multiple elections, Benjamin Netanyahu as an unelected leader? So obviously, without getting too political, how do we address people who say that?
Yeah. So yeah, Toby, I think that's a fantastic question. And it often yields into really the hypocritical claim that Israel is run by a dictator, which is absolutely absurd because the Palestinian people have not had an opportunity to vote in the West Bank since 2005. And Mahmoud Abbas basically won one election to serve for 4 years in 2005, but I guess he chose to carry on the job without giving the Palestinian people a right to have an election. Actually, I think the answer to your question is pretty much in the question itself. How do I respond to questions that Israel is not a democracy due to the current state of Israel's government? I think the current state of Israel's government is because Israel's a democracy. We've had 3 elections in Israel because the representatives of the Israeli people have not fulfilled the requirements of Israeli law to form a government that will represent the interests of the majority. I think another interesting anecdote to answer your question is, again, I'm quoting Alan Dershowitz because he really does have a story for everything, where he said he was at dinner once with Bill Clinton and his wife, and when Bill Clinton was president, and Bill Clinton explained that, when he wants something from Jordan, he calls up the king, tells him, I want A, B, C done. And the next morning, it's all done. And when he needs something from Egypt, he calls Hosni. He was referring to Mubarak, back then the dictator of Egypt for over 30 years. Says, I need ABC done. And by the next morning, everything's done. And then he calls the Israeli prime minister. And he says, I need ABC done. And he responds, well, I'm going to go speak to the Knesset and I'll have an answer for you in the next few weeks. And that's essentially, in a nutshell, how vibrant Israel's democracy is. 3 elections in a year, I think, defeats every single argument that the Israeli people are not being properly represented in Israeli government. I think the claim that Bibi is an unelected leader is erroneous. It's simply from a factual perspective, politics aside. First of all, Likud as a party had inside elections to determine who the party's head or leader would be. Netanyahu won that by a landslide. And he's consistently either won or taken in a very close second run all 3 of the elections. And I think that him staying as prime minister, as the recent national unity deal has presented, indicates the will of the majority of Israelis.
Great. Thank you, Yoni. Guys, I think that's about all of the time that we have, but thank you everybody for joining us. This has been really fun, at least for me. I'm sure it's been great for the rest of my team too. I hope it was fun for you guys as well. Thank you all. Thank you to the Camera on Campus team, especially Yoni, my man. You did great as always. Pleasure to listen to you and have these conversations with you. If you guys enjoyed what you heard tonight, if you had fun, please visit our website, camera.org, and any of their affiliates. Visit cameraoncampus.org. There's lots of great stuff on there if you want to keep up on the work that our staff does, what we write, what our students write. You can check out our blog, which is on our website too. Lots of great stuff on there. If you want the opportunity, this is for college students. If you guys want the opportunity to work with really smart, insightful people like Yoni on a daily basis, please look into our programs. There are a lot of ways that we can help you, a lot of resources we can offer. We have a fellowship for college students, which is a fantastic program. It focuses a lot on writing op-eds, getting your voice out there, which is so important, especially in today's day and age. We're also working on, for this upcoming year, coming up with different tracks for the fellowship. So stay tuned for more information on that. As far as I know, we're still working things out there, but details will become available in the near future. Please look into that. We sponsor groups on campus. It's called the Camera on Campus Coalition. We can provide you with resources, including financial resources for events, what have you. If you have any questions about this stuff at all, please reach out to me, Yoni, Hallie, Douglas, Sasha, anyone on the Camera on Campus team. We would love to talk to you. We love talking to people. It's what we do. Please reach out to us. But I will let you guys go. Have a fantastic night. Thank you so much for joining us.